Thank you all. Welcome to the DFR Drone Responders DFR Working Group. This is Stephen Katz and co-chair Captain Fox from Chula Vista. Thank you for your flexibility of switching to Zoom. Any associates you have, please forward the Zoom address for the future. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Chief Warner, and who will kind of lead the way.
Yeah, thanks everybody. As you know, most of you here have DFR programs or are in the process of having DFR programs. We've gotten to a point where we've had great success moving forward as far as the interest levels, but now we've gotten to that next level where we're trying to figure out how do we get to the beyond visual observers. And we've been having great conversations with the FAA. They fully understand where we are, and they really want to help to move to the next level. So Joe is here, Joe Mora from the FAA, and Joe, I'll get you to introduce yourself and tell the others that are here. But today is about talking about the future and how we move forward from here. I just want to make one thing clear. We're not going to go back and look at the past. We're going to be focused on how do we move forward to get us all moving in the same direction together. So with that, Joe, thanks. And to all the members of the FAA, thank you all for being here and for all the work that you've done to support us up until now. Because there have been great things that have occurred, and we're not losing sight of that. And now we're hoping that we can get to that next level together to help save lives and property. Joe?
All right, and thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to come on here. I know that Charles and I have been talking a lot the last couple of weeks here, and so I'm Joe Mora. I know I've met with some of you. I see a couple of familiar names out there. I am the division manager within Flight Standards. We stood up a new division over here about a year ago, and it's because Flight Standards, as part of the FAA, is a bigger part of the policy side, and we had a lot of decisions being kind of spread amongst 5 different divisions, and I can go into some of the background of efficiencies that we've just kind of gained by doing that and over here. But prior to that, I was in the UAS Integration Office. We have some representatives here from the UAS Integration Office also. I was a director over there since that office stood up, and prior to that, we had an integration office that was a predecessor of that. Prior to all that, I was a field inspector in the Teterboro, New Jersey Flight Standards District Office. I'm a general aviation operations inspector, pilot, flight instructor. My wife and I owned a small flight school before coming to the FAA, and now I'm just glad to be here and glad to, as we've worked with Charles and many of you in the past, glad to really have the chance to not only get to some of the intent behind what we can talk about here today and efficiencies that I think we can actually realize pretty quickly here, but also to kind of pause and listen to whatever you'd like to bring to the table. And truly, we do want to hear from you directly too. Not just Charles, but want to hear from all of you. So, and quickly, I can have anybody else jump in if they'd like to, but some familiar faces of staff that you've worked with here. Everybody, I think, knows Mike O'Shea. I haven't met anybody in this realm of things that doesn't know Mike's name. Jeremy Grogan is here with us too. Some of you worked with him. And that's the Flight Standards and the AUS side. We also have some leadership from AUS here. We have Stephen George. I worked with him for many years. We have some more leadership from my office, Chris Dougherty, and our senior technical advisor, Emily Davis. And then on the air traffic side, you've got some heavy hitting leadership there from Jackie Jackson and Daryl Grant. Jackie, I was going to mention, did I miss anybody that you wanted to mention out there, or did you?
No, Joe, thanks for having us join the meeting today for sure. I don't see anyone else from the ATO. I was just scrolling through, so go ahead and we can jump right in, but thank you for the opportunity to join today.
Awesome.
Joe.
So Charles, with that,
you also have, I think, Carrie. I'm not sure if that's Carrie Fleming or somebody else named Carrie with a single name, so I'm not sure. He may be on.
No,
that's who you think I am.
Oh, okay.
Thanks, Carrie. Sorry I missed you there.
Thanks for
No, it's okay. He was hiding behind no last name. So
this came The invite came via my text messaging, so I don't know why it's weird. I was
That's
trying
okay.
incognito. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks for calling me out.
Well, I'll offer here too, Charles or Captain Fox or Stephen or anybody. Would you like to say anything to kick it off or to set the tone here, or want me to dive right in?
Dive right in.
Okay. So how did we get here? I know many of you have been working through the processes that we have in place. And many of you have your contacts. I'll keep throwing Mike under the bus there. Mike O'Shea's worked with lots of you and others. Charles let me know about 2 weeks ago that and he went to some of our upper leadership too, that things were getting to a frustration point, and we always want to know that. And we're not always aware of it, as many of you are dealing with a lot of different things too. We especially over here have our, eyes focused on air carrier operations, delivery, other infrastructure inspection, emergency hurricane operations, all the other things that are going on too. And we never want to lose focus on any really important group like drones as first responders. But I wasn't aware that much tension was building. So within the FAA, we got together, leadership here too, to kind of look at. Charles had thrown out 2 things that he really wanted to get to, and one was the plan for the current drone as first responders waivers that were submitted, and the second was the plan and timeline for methodology for quickly approving and replicating technology for the DFR. I'll refer to them as drone first responder DFR, to eliminate visual observers. I brought along some slides and some examples that I can pull up, just if I'm going to mention something, because I know we all live in different frames of reference of worlds. We're immersed in aviation every day, and maybe everybody on this call isn't as immersed in it. So with that being said, in the short term, we have the updated list from Charles of the applications for public aircraft operations seeking relief from visual observers from 91-113. And that has been coordinated internally here to see what we can do. And I know even in just the past week, at least 8 or so of those of the standard type have been moved and are being processed right now.
Could you clarify what that means?
So
The
the
type,
FAA is a pretty large organization, and
No, but I mean the type of DFR waiver that you're talking about. Is this the FRB loss, the regular DFR with visual observer?
no, these are ones without visual observers. So if they haven't been coming out the other end of the sausage making machine, they will be very shortly. And essentially there's two criteria, and one of them, I'm used to talking FAA federal speak here, so I usually don't call out names of individual operators or companies, but if somebody wants to step up and say, hey, that's me, or we can do that, but I'll talk in a little bit more generality. So one of the process procedures or efficiencies that we put in place right away was to look at, okay, some of the things that we've approved for particular operators, how quickly can we repeat that, and what can we initially do to open up operations without visual observers? So the first thing that everybody can essentially get, and that's what we've been pushing through, is that if you're operating 200 feet and below, and you have an ADS-B in receiver, and I can explain a little bit of the gap on this one too, why you would need an actual receiver. Essentially, you can remove your visual observers. You can operate beyond visual line of sight over your area that's of population. We're trying to focus on the areas of population or where you need the drones, and I know that some operators are out there that have worked with us in the past. One of the reasons we're looking for other than sparsely populated areas to keep you there is because That takes out a segment of ultralights, and areas where parachute or hot air balloons land. So you don't have to worry about that segment. You add on the layers of safety that we know that there's been airspace studies that encountering a non-ADS-B equipped aircraft in airspace below 200 feet, especially over yellow parts of sectionals or towns or more congested areas, is very low. So in those areas, the approvals will essentially come with have an ADS-B in receiver, stay below 200 feet, and if you have structures that go above 200 feet, as long as you stay within 50 feet of that structure going up and over it, that's okay. And the whole intent of this is to be performance-based. We're trying to be less prescriptive and discuss the intent behind something, rather than tell you exactly what the technical parameters of that equipment must be. So number one is the 200 feet below, and then number two is going to be the 400 feet with some technology. So Charles, do you want to prompt me for more detail on that or take questions on the 200 foot?
Well, I just wanted to clarify because we've heard in the past that this was for Mode C Vail, but you're now expanding that. I just want to make sure that people understand that.
Yeah, so we have reauthorization language that reinforces that in a Mode C Vail, this is appropriate. But we've also looked at it that in uncontrolled airspace, Class G, not near airports, below 200 feet, the likelihood of aircraft that are non-ADS-B equipped, and remember, if you're ADS-B equipped, the rule also says that if it's installed, it must be on. So it's not a choice for manned aircraft to turn it on or off in the nose. So given those, and I will probably flash a slide on here to kind of get you into the mind frame of our perspective. Okay.
And the other question that came up is, does this ADS-B need to be on aircraft, or is ground-based acceptable?
Okay, does not need to be on aircraft. Ground-based is acceptable. And I think what we can talk about there is what quality of receiver would you need? Once again, it's going to be performance-based. So are you seeing the color
Yes.
slide here that I have flashing
Yes.
up? So in a traditional sense, we've used these slides for a lot of different things. If somebody comes with a new Boeing product or a new aircraft that they want to certify, we've got a way to go through it where we have the rules that handle aircraft certification. Now, just because you have a certificated airworthiness certificate on your aircraft and you've got that, doesn't mean that you can just go out and carry passengers or operate anywhere you want. You've got some operator requirements, and they're in different parts of our rules. And then just because you have an operator or a student pilot certificate, for example, doesn't mean that you can get into all airspace. There's rules that talk about establishing two-way communication, getting authorization or being cleared into airspace. So that's the airspace side of it. When we look at drone considerations, and we do consider public safety and first responders as a really good ground and a good justification to lean forward in this, is we have to look at all three of these things at the same time and kind of the robustness of what they're offering in those. This is where I go. If you saw my water glass slide, or by Thursday, it's usually a vodka slide. We use the terms robustness. It's a SORA term, a specific operational risk assessment, international type of term. But if what we're trying to do is take these three categories, and in a new and emerging segment, we don't want to be so prescriptive saying this is what you must do, this is the only technology you can use. What we want to say is, okay, in the case of what you're doing or what anybody's doing, if you don't have a lot of reliability on the aircraft side of it, does the operator have a lot of procedures in place that can assure that they're properly trained, know how to operate, where to operate, what to do? That can make up for some lack of aircraft reliability. And then airspace. Can you limit it to certain airspace? Can you limit it to certain areas over the ground where you operate? And what we're saying is there should be a minimum level of all these things, but they don't all have to be the same. And you can supplement one with the other as long as you get to an acceptable level of water in the bigger glass over here. So if you relate that back to drone as first responder, you've got a technology solution, ADS-B in this case. We're going to talk about some of the other technologies to get you up to 400 feet and a little further out. That should be a given that you can do certain things here. Some operators, for example, have been operating with VOs for many years in these places or overlapping some of these sensors and they know and they have the operational experience that can make some of these test beds expand or make some of the repeatable things expand over time. And then some of you have done airspace studies too and have really good knowledge of where the things are happening in your airspace. Is there a military base? Where are the heliports? Where are the flight schools? Is there unusual activity that happens in certain corridors? So the whole idea is to kind of unleash this as we can in the quickest fashion. And I will flash this here and I'll just come back to it. We have some of these safety continuum charts, but I'm going to focus on this one. The whole idea is too little rigor. We don't do anything, put anything in place. That's not a safe place to be. If we require way too much, it's also not a safe place to be. So we're trying to seek this balance, and I've got some examples here, but let me get back and stop displaying here so I can see some faces. Charles's question was about what kind of ADS-B receiver would you need? Does it need to be on the aircraft? Does it need to be on the ground? The intent is to get something that's out there and is working for you. In a perfect world, I would say you get a low-cost solution that's a receiver. If you're out in the field and that's where you're operating the drone from, or you're standing there launching the drone, it could be portable. If you're sitting in an office and we've had some people mount antennas on the top of their buildings so they get a better reception, that's your option too. To me, and to what we're leading towards, is the idea is to see that compliant traffic that's operating in the area and the ADS-B receivers for the gaps. You can get commercial off-the-shelf apps for free on your phone that will show ADS-B traffic flying over that's giving it to you through the internet. That might not give you what's immediately in your area or are other sensors on the ground that go into that internet connection, and the latency in that and everything probably won't give you the best up-to-minute reference for your particular area right there. So if you were sitting next to a screen showing something that could show me an aircraft coming from 20 miles out on the internet connection, that's good awareness. If you have a receiver that now you started using and is working for you, and you've seen from how you've installed it, you know where a blind spot might be with a building blocking or something like that, and you can now see an aircraft that just took off from a heliport and their squat switch now turns their ADS-B on, and you have that direct ADS-B in connection. The intent is for you to provide that solution, which for a snapshot in time for right now is going to be sufficiently safe and not overly rigorous or under, saying you don't need anything. And the example that I like to bring up in the aviation realm is we had problems with aircrafts and general aviation pilots stalling aircraft. So bringing inadvertently on landing, bringing the aircraft to an angle of attack that just the wing stops lifting. So they had low-cost angle of attack indicators that were so cheap to install, but they weren't built to our normal technical standards. And the whole conundrum was we either certify this low-cost angle of attack indicator to our normal standards, or we say the benefit of getting something in there that might not be meeting our traditional rigorous standards, but could immediately be put in place and save lives. It's better to get the lesser technology out there into qualified hands and start using it. And it's the same method of, we should be able to approve things, especially in the realm of things going on here, that maybe down the road are meant to be more highly automated, are meant to be, integrated into a UTM system, an unmanned traffic management system. And our rules are leading in that direction, even just for the latency of, hey, I see something on ADS-B. Now I have to factor in that reaction time of what it's going to take me versus what it takes the average person, what it takes a test pilot to do that versus the automation being able to supplement it. So long story short, Charles, coming full back, the idea is performance-based, and it's not just an idea. They're being put through the system right now that step one is, yes, if you want to remove visual observers, even outside of Mode C veils, below 200 feet, you have an ADS-B in receiver, you have procedures in place, then you can remove visual observers.
So one other question says, follow up on that in regards to having your own ADS-B in receiver. Can that be accomplished if the UA itself has built-in ADS-B in, such as DJI's AirSense?
Yes. And once again, I'm reinforcing that the intent of this is that the equipment works. So you have to have procedures in place if you're sensing that equipment isn't doing what it should be doing. Where we're hoping your groups can help out too, and where we're hoping with upcoming rules is that, yeah, there is a lot of opportunity for industry consensus standards here and testing standards to develop to get better with this. But we are firm believers that, especially in the segment that you're working in, we should be able to approve things that are essentially dirt roads to get to places right now, when we know we need 4-lane highways, 4, 5, 10 years from now. And maybe 10 years from now, we'll look back and say the things that we were approving today were riskier than what we would approve 10 years from now. But given the other layers of what you're bringing to the table, your awareness, your professionalism, your safety management systems, the fact that you're a good test bed for these things allows us to justify embracing more risk on the front end here. To honestly, I don't believe that law enforcement's primary job is to have people looking at the sky, and we've got some studies out there that also say that visual observers probably aren't as good as a lot of the automation that's starting to present itself. So anything else rolling through on the questions, Charles?
Yeah, there's a question that says, so are you saying software over the internet providers will be accepted if you can prove the statistics, detection, distance, and latency? And if so, has the threshold been discussed for latency as acceptable?
So that's where we haven't gone and said that. So the answer to that is, I think it's a no. The answer being, if you just wanted to use one of the free software options or an aviation software option over the internet, the requirement is going to be that you have to have an ADS-B in receiver itself. So once again, on the ground, we've been told it can be anywhere from less than $100 up to $800. But once again, that is really to supplement the fact that there's a lot less controls in that software over the internet than you have with just the receiver alone.
And then for clarification, the question is it possible for agencies to achieve this waiver if they are in uncontrolled airspace? That's lost it. Where to go?
Uncontrolled is where this is going to be. Yes.
Yeah, this is all Mode C veil, uncontrolled, all of it.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Now the controlled airspace ones, I think there are possibilities for that too. And I think we do have some examples out there, but it just requires, because as you all know from some of the operations you have out there, that it's just more complex airspace. There's more air traffic awareness that needs to be going on and more coordination at a local level for that.
Thank you. It looks like Jeremy added some more language specific in the chat. So if everybody wants to refer to that. Joe, follow-up question on 200 feet and below. You were talking about in 400 feet, but you mentioned in uncontrolled airspace. How about if it's within UAS FM? Are we talking up to UAS FM? And then I'll ask a follow-up question, which is what happens if the local agency, the local airport or ATM approves a tailored airspace that has custom airspace or tailored airspace for an agency. How does this relate to the UAS facility map grid?
Before you answer that, let me just add in, I know that we've been having conversations with FAA and some others, ATO, that they're looking at maybe creating a path to do tailored airspace, which would be something more formalized as opposed to the one-off things we've been doing. I take it that would be taken into consideration as well.
Yeah, so to take a couple pieces of that, and I can go back and confirm on some of these, but right now, this is not the approvals to, we do this with rules too. We call them Christmas trees. If we try to if we throw everything on the Christmas tree to make sure that it's right the first time, it sometimes falls over by its own weight. So the idea is to get this out there, and it would not be underneath the facility map altitudes for the general approval right now. Because that's another factor of.
I'm sorry, you said above or below, Joe? I'm trying to clarify.
Below. So it
So,
would not be
if you're in
below-
controlled airspace below a UAS FM, we're still, if you're in controlled airspace that has a UAS FM, this will not apply right now.
You would need a separate, you would need a separate provision of how you're getting into that facility map altitude. Because right now there's, for visual line of sight, there's Lance authorizations. Otherwise, I know there's separate agreements on that, but that's something that we'll take back and talk about. But initially it would be no, we want to get the approvals out there. So it's Class G, 200 feet and below, excluding facility map altitudes. Like I said, the benefit of doing this is I think there's ways to get approvals out there quicker that can get people operational, that can give more time to. I don't want to pause initial approvals waiting on the perfect approval, basically.
No, we like that too. The reason I ask about UAS FM is most operations are larger cities that can afford DFR, which is this group, and most of them means that there's some type of controlled airspace within their operating area. So that's not true for all of them. There's definitely Class G operating space.
And that's what we can take back, especially with our air traffic colleagues here. We're looking for efficiencies right now. And part of this, and if you look at us historically, how we've done this type of efficiency, agriculture is one of the ones that I wanted to give an example of, but there were two other parts to your question, and my bad for not writing it down. One was the facility map altitudes. What was the other two?
It would be tailored, but if it's tailored, it's in controlled airspace. So right now, we'll stay where we are. Class G airspace, 200 feet and below, ADSB in.
Yes.
With your own receiver.
Yep.
Is kind of the recipe. We'll call it a framework right now.
And Chris can correct me if I'm wrong here, but that is the recipe for public aircraft operations. It is also the recipe if you choose to go Part 107. So if you choose to go Part 107 and go the civil route, we can give essentially the same thing.
This is true.
And so this would be basically taking the public safety obstructed shielding waiver with the package of 3 waivers that Chris's team has been working on in the past, that's been out there now, that's been very much widely applauded to go forward. So it would be the same thing. But the question is, on all of this, what's the distance approval?
So once again, It's going to be dependent upon your equipment installation. So you don't want to rely wholly on the internet connection. You want to be relying on the equipment that you have. So that ADS-B receiver, what is it going to work for you distance wise? And then the reality is going to be, what can you command and control? What type of lost link do you have? We're very much trying to be performance based. Once again, it's describing the intent of how safe can you launch an aircraft. Remember, this is a big step in the direction that we want the future to go. But you're launching an aircraft and it goes over the hill, it's gone. So, Chris, unless you want to give a waiver example, I don't have a definitive horizontal distance for that.
We looked at the data that we had and what we came up with, and also discussed it with other police departments on what their requirements were, and that's where we proposed a mile just from the guy in the patrol car out there launching a drone and then doing his operations, and we determined a mile was actually over what everybody was requiring. So we thought that was pretty generous on that end. If you want more, obviously if you want something else, then come to us and give us a situation and talk to us about it.
Well, the DFR
We're not in the business of saying no. We're in the business of saying, hey, show us what you got and let us work through it and see what we can come up with.
And I think what you did, Chris, with the public safety obstructed shielding waiver kind of took the tactical waiver to a new level, if you will, without having to go through and get a COA to get it. So again, we applaud that. But with DFR, it's typically 2 or 3 miles, depending on where you were in the process of getting approvals for that. So that's just something consideration. But you're saying, let's look at the operations and be able to figure out the performance to get that done.
Right. Not everybody can get out to 3 miles to do that. And it's very hard to navigate a lot of the traffic that goes out that far. So we're looking at it from a realistic point of view too, but we're not close to saying no. We're just saying, show us that you can mitigate that distance. And we haven't really seen any good use cases to go out 3 miles. Now, if we're talking radar and talking other technology involved, okay, well, that's a different story and we can go along those lines. But for just the guy launching the drone out of the van, like we had seen before, and doing his particular mission set, when the mile out seemed to cover that, and it was beyond the tactical waiver that you guys were getting previously. I think that was like 1,800 feet from the operator.
1,500 feet. So you were being gracious.
We went, but we had other operations that were going out further than that in a similar situation. So we took it out to a mile and said, well, okay, well, let's work with this and see what kind of data we get back from this. And so
just to clarify, I want to make sure that it sounds like there is a way to DFR through Part 107.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. That we noticed that there was a shortfall in that, and so we've made this effort to go back out to the PAOs and the police departments and the PSOs, volunteer fire departments, and we're going back out to them going, hey, what is it that you need in your mission set? And let's put together something that works for you and go from there. And that's what we came up with so far. This is the first iteration of this waiver. And we Part 107 gives you a lot more flexibility, in my opinion. And I don't know, I'm a fan.
So
Yeah, and again, thanks to your office, but I have a question here that says many of us on the call already have existing jurisdictional COAs allowing us to operate visual line of sight in the controlled airspace in our operational area. Can we build on those existing jurisdictional COAs to now include BVLOS with ADS-B in and remain under 200 AGL?
When you're talking about COAs, it's outside of my thing now. So
Chris is on the 107.
107 side. So yeah,
That was open to anybody.
I saw Jackie came off of mute.
I'll take this one on. I will say we will explore this in our next call. We'll have more information on this for you. And we'll take this one back and get back to you on it, Joe. I'm not sure that we can do it yet, and so I don't want to give out the wrong information here. So let us look at that and get back to you.
Yeah, and Matt, just to be clear, it's only Class G airspace. I know
Yes.
you're in a controlled airspace. So this was a question from Matt Slauson out of Southern
But we're
California.
definitely willing to look at that. And as Joe has explained already, we're definitely looking at all options to get you what you need and work through that. So the more information we're able to share and the questions we're being asked could give us much more to work on and be ready at our next meeting. For sure.
So to clarify the distance, Joe, your answer sounded, and then kind of jumping on Chris's a little bit. One of the questions is, what if we have ADS-B sensor, we're flying lower than 200 feet, what does it matter how far away are you? Because we have the detection area around the drone protected. So besides the requirements of the drone, why would the distance matter? It shouldn't matter in your operational area.
So in a perfect world, that's what it should be. And that's just for some insight into how we did our rules. For Part 107, there was a lot of debate going on that, what is visual line of sight? We should limit it to 1,500 feet. We should limit it to 400 feet. There's a Volpe study that says a 2x2 white object in the sky at the time can roughly be seen for 398 feet and oriented. We chose to say you must keep the aircraft within unaided visual line of sight. That means that you can orient the aircraft, and we never put a number on it. And I'm a big proponent of the less we can put numbers on those, the better, because as the technology improves and as your use case improves, and this kind of builds upon itself too. If you allow that culture to kind of thrive and develop, I truly believe that you're going to have more manufacturers, you're going to have more optical sensors, you're going to have more acoustic sensors, you're going to have more radars that will allow for the expansion that you want. To give a finite number on the ADS-B out, it's something that we can take back and look at a little bit more, but I would defer to the fact that you're going to be limited probably by more things like your span of area that you can actually realistically patrol, or that you want to launch to, or that your battery is going to allow you to do, that type of thing.
That's what it feels like. It would be the limitation of the aircraft, cellular radio backup, and how long and how far can you go for battery life? Because there are some gas-powered drones too. So whatever the range might be based on the drone.
It's the least of the ranges, that whatever factor is that limits your distance.
Yeah, and I can tell you this is different from long linear infrastructure, which we work with a lot of those components. The idea is still you're talking a few miles probably for this type of thing. 1 mile if you're launching from your trunk, essentially, like Chris said. But a fixed location, we've seen things longer, and especially if you have an antenna or if you have mechanisms for a little bit higher up that you can retain radio line of sight.
If I may add, and now we have given a waiver. We have given waivers out to 2 miles. Those are 50 foot, and the guy was actually in a bucket truck up above all of the obstructions, so he had a clear view of the sky, to check for traffic and so forth. But 2 miles seems to be the maximum number that we've given historically for that, and the data kind of supports that for watching out for traffic and with the use of ADS-B and so forth. That has been, and that goes along with the type of drone you're using. A lot of drones won't get out past 3 miles. And so the 2 mile limit has always been that sweet spot as far as the maximum that we've gone out with no visual observers. And beyond that, we've usually had a much more robust mitigations in place. And so that's kind of where we're at as far as the risk level goes.
So Chris, just to clarify, that's for 107.
It is 107. That's
Got it. And for public aircraft operations, currently with a visual observer, we only have to keep a 2-mile visual detection area around the drone. So it's
Yeah,
a little separate. So I just wanted to confirm for everyone, the most under 107 is 2 miles is what you've done in the past.
right. And you don't even have to keep track of, you don't even have to be able to see the drone. You just have to be able to see the area.
Correct.
So, you can go out a mile and drop it down to 50 feet. Obviously, you're not going to see the drone out that far, but you're able to see the traffic in the area.
Thank you.
And there's a question from Jake Bouchard who says, what about those of us that have an overabundance of data to try new systems and open the door for further DFR development with emerging technologies that are currently sitting in limbo waiting with the FAA? What is the short-term path forward you are suggesting to allow those manufacturers to make the systems you have spoken of without waiting months or years for those systems to be approved?
Okay, so like we had a recent conversation with one of them. There's been testing that's been done at the test sites. There's been testing that's been done independently to meet the ASTM standard. Part of the discrepancy in all those discussions comes in that the assumptions you come with start to skew the numbers one way or the other way. And that's where we said with Charles, especially, that we want to get to a better agreement on what off-the-shelf results would be for a particular product. So if it's a product coming to market for the first time, the future vision is that, please comment on our rule when it comes out, but there's going to be a lot of emphasis on industry consensus standards. So the future vision is that those criteria can be ironed out, but there's things as simple as encounter speeds. When we use encounter speeds for our equations, we use 120 knots. We say that something's essentially moving 120 knots, and it can be coming at you from any angle. It can be coming at your drone from head on, it can be coming from the side, it can be coming, askew of it. And those are the things that we do. Some people are bringing to us numbers that are less than 120, which may actually be more accurate. Maybe not everything is moving at 120 knots. Maybe that's not the right average to use. But then you take that, if you're talking 120 knots, that roughly calculates to about 200 feet per second. So now, if your assumptions are that your reaction time to manually or tell the person operating that drone to do something because an aircraft's coming, if you're saying it takes 5 seconds and our assumptions are it takes 7 or 8 seconds, now our calculations are going to come in different than your calculations. So what we want to get to is we want to get to a place where, all right, the assumptions will be nailed down. We can take a conservative out of the box picture of, you want to install this equipment, it should be good out to this distance, barring anything like obstructions like a building or installation error. But essentially, if you want to do the next level approval, which we're working through right now too, that has technology, and we are approving these for the technologies that we've worked with the manufacturers right now. Essentially, the repeatability would be, yeah, you might get something that's a little bit more limited for the scope of that initial installation, but you can still go to 400 feet. You want to extend out to what the full capability of that is, say it's 2 miles. But we've come to the agreement that your initial installation is 1 mile. That goes back to the safety water glasses here with some operational experience. And this is where we wanted to talk about receiving back some data. We want to talk about the reporting on COAs a little bit. We had an IOU for that. But really getting specific with that particular manufacturer, I think there's ways, once you have some more operational data, or once you have airspace awareness that's got a lot of fidelity, we just open that back up to the full capability. But I think the way to get the initial operations out there that depend on the sensors and the technology, similar to what we've done with some of the package delivery and other things, is we start on a little bit conservative side, and then we open it back up as it expands and propagates. And what this allows for is it allows the manufacturers to get operational. It allows you to get operational. It allows iterations and improvements on that technology, combinations of different sensors we're seeing from different people. I share with this group because some of the other groups out there, I de-identify and generalize things, but some operators are using hybrid approaches where acoustic systems are really good at sensing something is in a particular quadrant, but they're not very good at pinpointing where that's coming from. So some are using acoustic sensors, and then they've got an optical component that says, oh, I should look over there, which is beautiful in my mind because it's a biological thing. That's how birds and other things and animals operate too. You kind of you hear a direction something's coming from, and then you look and then you pinpoint it with your optics. So that was a long-winded discussion of, yeah, we want to work with the manufacturers. We don't want to pick winners and losers. That's what we're trying to avoid. So once again, we're trying to give you the intent and be performance-based.
So the other question is, many agencies are concerned about flying low at 200 feet or lower because of nuisance concerns in community. So as they have submitted ADS-B plus radar combo waivers, is there an update for them as far as how that's moving forward?
Yeah, and I think and I just got a message here too that was reminding me that maybe this is going back to the two options, the 200 feet or the 400 feet. Is that where you're headed with that question? If you want to fly higher?
Yes.
Okay. So the 200 feet essentially goes back to, we've looked at airspace. We've looked at the generalization of usage of airspace at certain altitudes, and we designed our rules and other things around these layers. So for those that don't live in this every day, if you talk about like 91, 119 minimum safe altitudes, for most aircraft, you're supposed to stay 500 feet from person, vessel, vehicle, or structure. And other than sparsely populated areas, you're supposed to stay 500 feet above the ground. So it's no coincidence that when we did our first public aircraft COAs with Jackie and the group way back when, we started at 200 feet with test sites, we went up to 400 feet. We then promulgated that in a rule in Part 107. We went up to 400 feet because it gives you that buffer, which it gives you at least a 100-foot buffer of where most of the traffic should be. But there is a decline in traffic as you get lower. How low? You don't want to squeeze people right to the ground. And for noise concerns and visual concerns and everything else too, you don't want to keep them to 50 feet, which some waivers we do. So the sweet spot was 200 feet. If you want to get higher and be less of a nuisance, that's where the technology comes in, because most all of the installations of the sensors that we've seen can definitely do above you and your immediate area that you're going to be concerned with, or at least it might be a blind spot right above your head, but at certain degrees, but it can do that immediate area above you. Now, how far out can it do? That's really the question of the sensor itself. But once again, 200 feet, if that's a start for you and that works, if you add some technology, and we're saying we're open to what the manufacturers want to bring to the table here, then you can get higher.
So Joe, what the question is, I think, is how do we get to that point of the proving ground? Is there an opportunity that you'll work with an agency, not necessarily as a replication model, but as a test bed, if you will, of looking at the airspace, the flight analysis, all those kind of things to do something to where they can collect data and then get it to a replicatable model? Is that something that's an option?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the best way to do this and the most expeditious that I've seen is if that manufacturer pairs up with an operator, put it in use, overlay it on what you're doing with the 200-foot approval. Use visual observers if you have to for a little while, but work with us and get together the safety case that equipment is going to be. And we've gone through it a couple times with a couple different manufacturers right now. Like I said, in the time being and what we can do now, we will do that absolutely. or you can do it working on your own if you have a test bed someplace that you want to do it. I like live environments because they're more realistic of what you're going to encounter. But it doesn't mean that you can't pick a test environment that could be representative too.
So another question, is there a way that agencies who are trying to do this can get the flight information in their area from an easier fashion than having to request FOIAs? They're trying to do their due diligence with your data, but
Yeah.
it's not always easy and timely to get.
Well, part of it too is there's a few companies, I mean, I'm just going to lay it out there, that have gone to our NAST data release board. I don't want to disrupt the name here. So they're working through, and some of the sensitivities of that are around the security and federal security and local security operations that are filtered or need to be filtered. So there's sensitivities around that. So there isn't an easy way that I can tell you that you can get that data right now. FOIA is one option for that particular area, but there's really no substitute for, if you're getting up and operational, or if you're thinking of using equipment, if you're going to install a radar system, we're pretty sure that, if you're getting something that's at least been used before, because I do hear claims of manufacturers that are claiming things work, and others are reporting back that they're not working as they should be. But that doesn't mean that you can't turn on those sensors prior to getting your approval to rely on them without visual observers. You can overlay that. We had air carrier operators that had visual observers in the same city for 2 years, and they came back with exact data on what they saw and what they didn't see. So you could do it through visual observers. You could do it through actually installing the equipment. Can do it through FOIA, but I don't have a better answer for the sharing of that.
Well, and I know places like Oakland spend a great deal of money doing testing, and even spending money to do the testing with helicopters in flight, some other stuff to really dig into the weeds. And so hopefully that kind of data is what you're looking for to help make decisions. Is that correct?
Yeah, and ultimately we want the decision to be on the operator. We don't want the local decision to have to be coming back to the FAA. So in other words, we just don't have the ability to analyze your particular situation. So the more you know about where are the heliports located, how much activity do you actually get? Are you in communications with the first responders or the emergency medical helicopters that are going back and forth? Is there a military base and that's what we've seen too. There's operations without ADSB that might be very high in one segment of a Mode C Veil. And what's the reason behind it? You'd probably be the best ones aware of exactly what's going on there. And once again, I don't want you to get caught up in some of our bureaucracy of rightfully so, not sharing information that might even be some of yours that we shouldn't be really careful about sharing.
Okay, I have a question. This is in the chat from Ryan Wallace. It says, can you provide additional input about the approval path forward for BVLOS without VOs in controlled airspace?
So in controlled airspace, I know that we've worked at least one without VOs that made some attention lately. We will have to go back to see how we want to do that repeatedly here, but I can almost wholeheartedly tell you that in controlled airspace, it's going to be more of an air traffic discussion than it will be with flight standards, because that's the idea is you shouldn't have to know all the nuances of where it's going back and forth or anything, but if it's in controlled airspace, air traffic, and Jackie and Daryl's responsibility is really going to be the key there. So right now, I think you go through your CAPS process that you want to correct, and that's how the incoming for the 91 For the 91 applications, that'll be PAO, you go through CAPS. If you wanted to do 107 in controlled airspace, you'd go through drone zone. So,
And you get the drone zone waiver for the beyond visual line of sight operation. And then you go over and apply for a COA to operate within that airspace.
Is there anyone on the call from ATO that can talk to that question?
Yeah, I'm Daryl Grant. Good afternoon, everyone. Daryl Grant, the team manager for UAS policy, the AJVP 22. What Joe and Chris just said, that's basically how the process works. But we are looking at ways to speed that up, so to speak.
Daryl, if everybody's already pleased to meet you, sir. If the airports are already comfortable with the UASFM, why not allow at least up to UASFM as a blanket? We would recommend that be a good first start if possible.
Okay, yeah, we'll definitely take a look at that. And someone also mentioned the tailored airspace earlier in the conversation. We're also looking at that as well.
Yeah, I think the idea with the tailored airspace is trying to get to a process instead of being the one-offs that we've done in the past. So I think that there's work being done to propose something to ATO that would give a way to communicate this to the airports so they're all kind of a part of this as opposed to hearing about it and going, huh?
Sure.
Yeah. The argument would be made that treat up to UASFM the same as class Gulf airspace, right? It's the FAA looks at it as an automatic approval already for commercial operations, and recreational. Why wouldn't we do that same thing for beyond line of sight?
And Daryl, is that something you can check on and get back to us and let us know how that's going?
It is, Charles. I'll definitely get back with you on it.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
yeah, and if we're being careful on some of our answers here, one of the things is we don't want to give information that we haven't checked or made sure. We don't want to flip-flop back and forth on this. So once again, we appreciate the questions because hearing you directly, this is actually really helpful.
Well, I will share. I'm getting messages off to the side as well, and there is still some concern about what people are concerned that they're hearing the federal two-step because you're not giving direct answers as to we all want these concrete 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
And I know that because the technology is different, but it would be helpful over time if we can get a process to say if there's an agency that's doing this work of extensively getting the data and having that discussion with you and figuring out how do we get that operational. And I mean, let's just lay one out there, because I've been working with you all with Campbell PD, and they said it's okay to share this with Campbell PD. They got approval of their waiver, but not necessarily saying we're going to replicate that right now because you want to work with them similar to what you did with Pearland, Texas to learn the technology. Is there a way that other agencies can do something similar to take advantage of all the work that they've done? And they've got a lot of knowledge of their airspace, because I know that's what you guys are looking at. The comfort level is, does the safety case cover what we're concerned about? Do you know the airspace? Have you done the communications? All those things, and the technology using, what does it look like as far as the range? Because I think there was even some changes in that Campbell, some negotiation of what was acceptable to where it wasn't what was initially asked for, but at least it got it to a starting point.
Yeah, and I'll try to be really direct here. Yeah, that will be repeatable. We just need to iron out some of the what would the out of the box installation be that isn't particular to Campbell be for the next location, and what kind of, and like I said, we want to be less concrete on what kind of data we would need. We just need some reliability of the new installation to expand it out. So I know they use meters for a lot of things, but I think we're in the discussion of meters right now for distances that you can go out. So that should not take long to be repeatable. And the second question was the yeah, I don't want to give a two-step on this. I wanted to give an example of so we might not be the most agile organization all the time, and we're kind of large, but we do put focus on things like we're putting focus on this right now. So if any of them following the agricultural operations, we had a similar situation there where in 2014, we certificated the first drone agricultural sprayer operation. We used our existing procedures because that's what we have, and that's what we've been doing for a while with some of these things. We've been trying to make refinements, but using that process of actually having people go out there from the Flight Standards District offices, watch training exercises, do everything that we've done, like a $1.2 million air tractor. It took us about 9 years to certificate 158 of those, and we now have about 103 of those that are still existing. But we looked at it last June and we said, we've got thousands of exemptions now for people wanting to do this. And they're essentially farmers or smaller business people that don't want to necessarily go through all the pain. They're not flying a $1.2 million air tractor from a airport to a farm over people with hundreds of gallons of things. Chris and others can explain this too. But most of them want to operate 200 feet and below, and they want to operate visual line of sight. So we put a new process in place, and this is what Jackie was alluding to, and Daryl too, that it's not hard for us to come together as policy officers and put a process together. So we put a new process together in June, and since June, we've actually certificated today. It's been an additional 1,082. So I know that we can do the same thing here. I know that of the dozens of applications we have now, there's probably hundreds that are waiting to happen. So I don't want to stand here and make promises, but we are working this, and we are working this, as we said, in two phases. We want to get the ones that are in the queue out of the queue. And then we are working right now to look for the efficiencies to make it repeatable in the short term here and get more to the normal expectations for applications, which I was rattling off a few of these to Charles earlier today, that we have a petition for exemption. It says right in the rule, you should petition 120 days prior to your planned activity. Now that's kind of the highest level, and we've rolled back even the times for petitions for exemption. Waivers, the form says apply 45 days in advance of 7711-2. So our goal is to get back to realistic timelines that we put on some of those forms as soon as we can.
So let's look at Chris, just 1 second. We just do this. Is there a way that that you can commit to reaching out to the ones in the queue now to let them know where they are in the process, and with an idea forward as far as what's needed or the timeline to get where it needs to be?
Yeah, we can take a look at the list again, and we'll make sure that we have the right ones that you've pointed out. Like I said, I think there's a number of them that should be expecting something very soon. But Jackie, I think that's reasonable too. We can both go back and compare our lists and at least call out and say, I'll make phone calls if that helps.
Absolutely.
Well, I think it doesn't necessarily need to be a phone call necessarily, okay, yeah, go ahead and make the phone call. Never mind. I don't want to take a conversation away from anybody. But emails at a minimum would be helpful to say, here's kind of where you are. Here's, if you need something, here's what we need. And here's kind of where we hope to be to get you through.
Absolutely. And even some of the automation, I know you don't want to hear long-term down the road, but we've installed some of those things at a rudimentary level now, but with the new rule, lots of the discussion on automation is, when something's received in the queue, just like your best commercial applications out there, you should get at least an automated email that says that it's been received. You should generally be able to go in and see what step you are in the process that it's still going, and you should have the ability to ping and call a localized number that somebody should answer and say it hasn't fallen off the wayside, or we need additional information, or
Yeah, I think the process that comes back that's been frustrating is they get an email back saying still under review. And it's already been months at a time, and even as much as 8 months. Um, is there a possibility to have some kind of way of a tracking system or something that shows waivers in process and where they are? Or
Well, I think this is where Chris was trying to speak up to. A
sorry,
lot of
Chris.
what we focused on this last year was just getting the process more efficient. So I think average waiver processing time for 107 has been down to averaging 30 days or less. We've got certain processes here, the SGI process, which many of you are familiar with. Rather than building a system to track where it was, that went from being days or hours to minutes in the air traffic side. So there was no need to do it. So the goal is, I don't want to know everything about everybody's operation. I don't want to have to put you in a queue where you need to get updates that often. The idea is to set the expectation that it should be closer to the, 45-day mark or less. And you get something repeatable, and you get something that's we call it summary grants in the FAA when we do exemptions. The example was we did that early on with the Motion Picture Association of America. We did the first 7 exemptions. I got to put this in perspective because this is one of my favorite stories, and Jackie was there for it, and Steve George and others. The FAA as a total, if you can't follow a rule, and many of you know this, we have this beautiful thing in our executive branch and aviation specifically that says, from the statutory level, we can exempt rules that aren't even waivable. So we can essentially make that rule go away and build it back up with conditions and limitations. So back in 2013, the FAA air traffic, aircraft cert, flight standards had processed a total of 432 petitions for exemption. When we did those first Motion Picture Association of America ones, and we said, okay, we can do it for 6 or 7, that took a little bit of time to do it, but we did it for them. Then we started getting more petitions rolling in, and in a few months we had done like a dozen, and then a few more months, and maybe at the 6-month mark, we'd done about 40. Once we got to about the 40 mark, we'd seen, okay, there's one called Clayco that's kind of construction, and there's a lot of other ones like construction. One was Douglas Trudeau, which was real estate, and there's a lot of real estate out there now, and you can't turn on TV without seeing a real estate drone shot. One was infrastructure inspection. So we had about 6 buckets. So we did summary grants of those 6. And now we started cranking through the exemptions. So long story short, we eventually did a Frankenstein amendment that essentially said, whatever you ask for, we're essentially going to give you this. If you're an oddity or you need to go outside of those parameters, we'll work with you. But essentially, if you can deal with this, that's how we're gonna give it to you. So that was 2014. By 2016, when the small rule came out, we had broken the exemption system in regulations.gov because they had the inundation of it. So we had granted over 5,500 petitions for exemption. We had 19,000 in the queue. Remember, we'd only dealt with 400 the year before this started. So we had 19,000 in the queue. And when Part 107 came out, we sent a letter to those 19,000 that said, the relief you seek is now in a rule. And then the ones that popped back, we had maybe a dozen or 2 dozen that came back out and needed to be worked as exemptions. So the strategy, even moving towards Part 108 right now, and especially in your segment, drone as first responders, is yes, can we get through these initial ones here in this space, particularly similar to what was done for SGI, similar to what was done with 107? And can we make it so that we don't have to read manuals anymore? We don't have to ask about your particular technology. We can essentially rely on your groups, your standards, and the commonality of what you're supplying so that we can crank out approvals and embrace more operators rather than have to give updates on where you are in a 5-month process.
And I'll just I'll raise one to the top top of the list is Oakland was in the process of trying to get their BVLOS without visual line of sight waiver. I mean, I'm sorry, without visual observer waiver, and they also had their previous waiver that expired, and they've been told that they're going to get it renewed, but so far it's still stuck somewhere. And so that's one that was they just want their current one renewal because currently they don't have any way to do operations that they had before.
I think that's one that came up in discussion this last week. I thought what I heard was that one was being renewed as is so that it can be
Yeah, I think I saw the same thing.
followed up by another request. Yeah.
They just haven't heard anything.
Okay.
So if you just make note of that one, if you don't mind.
Yep.
And then Ron Wallace asked if safety evaluations conducted under FAA 8040.6A are using certain evaluation criteria, it would be helpful to know what is being used.
So 8040.6 is our SRM order for, it's an FAA level order for UAS. The criteria in there's really no secrets that are outside of that. There's some ASTM standards that I've referred to, but
Joe, if I can
otherwise-
clarify,
Yeah.
you'd mentioned earlier that there's some back of the napkin math that you guys are potentially using to evaluate whether it's encounters or other things. And I think what I'm interested in is to learn more about what are those analyses? What do they look like? So that way we can do the same analysis that you guys are doing in our waivers so you don't have to recreate the wheel. That's what I'm asking for.
Yeah, and I think I would have to go back to some of the technical specialists here on the fact that it's really just the encounter models that the ASTM standard talks about as far as staying well clear or staying away from an EMAC. Those are either through the standard, you can get those, or we can get a separate call if we want to get down in the weeds and a little bit more technical. But I think that's what we want to pin down. And I've got, some of them on the phone here that can speak better to it, but that's where we want to pin down as far as what is an agreed upon encounter speed? What is agreed upon if you're operating manually, reaction time to it's detect and avoid. So that's where I believe the standards and even our 8040.6 order will identify the hazard, will state what the risk is, but it won't give you the firm numbers for some of those assumptions. And that's where we're coming at it here, that there's probably a better way to, and that's where we're going to work through with some of the ones that Charles just mentioned here. We if you want to talk Campbell, we went with, we made the decision to go with the assumptions that they brought to the table. I think that's where we just need to have a little bit further discussion on what's the standardized method for reaction time. But I'm a proponent of, I hate to have just one number. I'd rather have a discussion of the intent behind the numbers, because it could be different if it's one pilot watching a separate screen or two separate screens, or if it's somebody on a radio trying to tell that pilot, or it's somebody standing across the room trying to tell that pilot. These are some of the just human factors things that come in that might make variation in your proposal versus somebody else's proposal.
And I guess
sorry. I wanted to see if, because I know we're kind of going over on time. Chris, you answered a really interesting question. I don't know if you wanted to discuss it for the group, reference the BVLOS VO Class G airspace. The question came from Glenn Brock from Hammett PD.
Yeah, it's not an airspace waiver, and he's operating in Class G airspace was the question. And that's the rate we offer we're issuing the Part 107 waiver, which is what we call a PSO waiver that we had built for the public PAO, public service organization, or public safety organizations. And that's what we issue. And it would be easier to, it's easy to get one of those as we have a expedited process for that.
So if because I'm in the same airspace as Glenn, I just want to make sure. So we would need to apply for a Part 107 waiver.
Yes.
Well, hold on. That doesn't make sense. They're flying over people in public aircraft operations, Part 91. gives these organizations an advantage?
No,
Because they cannot, they're
waiver-
flying, hold on, Chris, they're flying a large aircraft, so they're not going to be able to mitigate the flights over people with categories of, with parachutes right now. They're flying high with a larger aircraft. So that's the question, is why switch to 107 versus stay PAO?
Our waiver is a part 30, is a 30.39 and a .145 waiver to operate over people and moving vehicles as well.
But if you're exceeding the weight limit for part 107, it's not going to be an option.
Right, if you now
Yeah,
do
if
that,
you're
then
Under that.
that's an entirely different situation there.
Oh, this is totally new news. So clarifying, you're saying, so it's not, even though you're going through drone zone, it's a part 107 and a part 91 hybrid. So do we need a?
No.
It's
Hold on,
purely
no.
part 107.
No, strictly part 107. And the part 107 waiver, that the PSO waiver that we have is a beyond visual line of sight, operations over people, operations over moving vehicles.
But
And
it does have.
And our part 107 waiver is given for all of Class G. So if you have to operate in something other than Class G, you just go over and get an airspace waiver for that.
What are the requirements for flying over people for this, Chris?
Oh, you're gonna try to pull that from my memory.
Well, is it the same as part 107? If it's
Yeah,
the
on
same,
part 107, we did an SRM that showed the data, the risk data involved with that. So we would say, hey, if you got, something to shield your propellers, and if you had some type of parachute of some type, there's a risk element for that. We're not, and forgive me because I don't have it memorized on my head, but that's kind of the two major mitigations that we have.
And an anti-collision light.
And any collision light. That's one thing that we did find that the data did support through the various organizations that they said if the drone would have had an anti-collision light, we would have seen it. And that's been a big contender for us.
The information's on our website, Stephen, as far as the guide.
Yeah, but this is, so we're talking categories. The category.
No, I don't care about categories. I don't care about categories.
So
if you follow categories, you follow the part 107 rule to the letter. But I'm not talking about categories. That's what the waiver is all about.
So we could fly a larger, it's a M300 or a M350 with
under 55 pounds,
no prop guards and no parachute.
Now see that's our mitigations. We ask that you do put prop guards on it. And we ask that you do put a parachute on it.
Understood.
For the larger. That's a mitigation because that's the risk. And based upon the accident data and the people going to the hospital for injuries, those are the two main mitigations that would have prevented those injuries.
And I don't want to leave Chris out there hanging. I've asked him to lean forward on this too, because especially in the public safety realm and heading towards the new rule, you were limited in the categories of what you could actually do for ops over people. So you have use cases here that, let's be honest, it's as a public aircraft operator, yes, the responsibility is on the government entity that's operating that, but it doesn't mean that you should be operating an unsafe aircraft over people. So the minimum mitigations that we put in place are parachute and guards. Now, is that for general public operations? Not right now. It's not really ready for that. Is it for public safety, and is there a public interest in getting these operations equalized with what you can do in PAO? Yeah, absolutely. So now the downside of 107 is you have to be fully compliant with 107, meaning you have to have a 107 certificate. But now you're not limited to governmental functions. You can now demonstrate your aircraft at a school if you wanted to or some of the things you might not be able to fly for governmental functions.
And one of the questions came up is, can you apply for Part 107 as an agency? And the answer has been yes, you can apply for that. Correct, Chris? Yeah. One other question, Raul, you had a question. I'd just like you to go ahead and ask it, if you don't mind. Oh, All right, let me see if I can find it here. He was asking, where'd it go? If an agency gets a 200-foot waiver to start, can they have a path to upgrade to the 400-feet waiver if they prove the radar efficacy, or should they go straight for the 400 waiver because it's fast enough to get that approved?
I want to say we're gonna have to get back to you on that, but I think the templates that are proposed to come out now, the goal is to be performance-based again once. So the idea would be you would have both in there, but whatever's going to be quickest. If you can live with 200 feet and below to get started, then the idea is we could probably start summarizing those a lot quicker than we could the more complicated ones.
Raul, did you hear that? That was the answer to your question. Did you have something else you wanted to ask?
No, that's fine. I got disconnected, but Tyler heard it, so I'll sync with him after.
And I appreciate you giving the feedback too, that I don't want to give any kind of, two-step answers here. We want to truly advise you in the right direction and what's going to work quickest, but trying to leave the doors open for the options here. But yeah, the quickest way would probably be if you can live at 200 feet to get started, then apply for that right away, and we'll work through the process.
All right, we're getting close to the 90 minutes to be here.
Ask one question, Charles. For part
Yes, go right
191, is our entry point the 91-113 waiver group still for if you're
Yes.
PAO, and we understand drone zone for part 107? Is that correct,
Yes.
sir? Thank you.
Yes. And
All right,
Chris
I
is
don't
looking
see-
for work, so he's behind the scenes saying 107. He's ready for more 107. So you can do that too.
Yeah, again, I'm going to give a shout out to Chris and his team for what you've done with the public safety obstructed shielding waiver. We appreciate that work on the Part 107 side because we have lots of agencies that don't qualify for PAO, and we have some that just don't want to go the COA route. So we'll keep working on getting that forward. So thank you all for what you've done. For the rest of the members of the FAA, thank you all for being here today as well. And thank you all for your help and support of public safety. We know you're always out there trying to help us, and sometimes your hands are tied. And sometimes we have to shake the trees a little bit to help get things loose. So, I'm that person that is always willing to shake the tree a little bit. And Joe, I appreciate your understanding of the direction going forward. And again, thank you for being here. And we'll be having a lot more information as we go forward. And to everyone, thank you all for being here. The DFR Working Group, thank you all for everything that you do. And of course, Mike O'Shea, Kerry Fleming, John Meehan have been great supporters of public safety. So want to give everybody of those, and Steve Pansky, yes, don't want to forget the names, but we all have gotten to places that we need to be because of your all's help. So we look forward to what happens next, and we're looking for all the yeses. Yes, 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 yes. And again, thanks for everybody being here.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for the feedback too.
Thank you very much.